Ohio State throttled Tennessee last night, just splattered them all over Columbus, Ohio. There is no elegant way to say this. I have never felt less hope for a visiting team since 2006. Do you guys remember, NFL fans will remember this, back in 2006, the Saints played their first game in the Superdome after Katrina had come through New Orleans, and they played the Falcons. That's why I remember this so well. It was the Steve Gleason game, the block punt, place goes insane. And I'm growing up a Falcons fan, right? And the Falcons are pretty good during this time. And so, I go into that game with confidence. Like, hey, it's a Monday night football game. Like, yeah, they're going to have some emotion down there, but we've got a pretty good team. That's Michael Vick's Atlanta Falcons. They had no shot. From bell one, they have no shot. And you're watching the game, and you're going like, oh, no. That was Tennessee last night. It was the biggest oh, no moment that I've had for a visiting team in what is supposed to be a competitive game since that Monday Night Football game back in 2006. Different circumstances, totally different circumstances, but I, for some reason, could not shake that feeling. That was 2006. This is 2024, right at the very end of it, no less. Tennessee had no shot. It was understood pregame. I talked to folks on both coaching staffs. It was understood, probably a little more than I understood it, that you had a mismatch. Now that doesn't mean Tennessee didn't believe they couldn't win the game, but it was a noticeable mismatch, and Tennessee knew they were going to have to have some things go their way. Spoiler alert: if you haven't watched the replay, they don't go Tennessee's way. And Ohio State did everything they didn't do against Michigan. I have also never watched a game that is so emphatic that has this like subcontext swirling about it. I swear to you, I go to Ryan Day's postgame press conference last night, like the first 19 questions are about the Michigan game, because that's all anyone could think about. And if you watch them play Michigan and you watch them play Tennessee, especially if you're like a newer college football fan and you don't get how crazy and unpredictable this sport is, it couldn't have made sense. Forget that. If you've watched the game for 50 years, watching them do what they did last night just makes no sense. Makes no same players. Same quarterback, those same receivers were on the field against Michigan. But that's okay. That's okay, because Ohio State still got everything in front of them. So, padlock stat, yeah, I got a whole bunch of them here. Let's, you know what, for due diligence purposes, let's pop the paper. I mean, if you tell me Will Howard's throwing for 317, you tell me Nico and Tennessee are barely topping 100, I feel pretty good on Friday if you tell me that Ohio State's going to win the following day. Tennessee, you know, there was a theme on our show throughout the year. Anytime someone played Tennessee, kept talking about how potentially vulnerable Tennessee was on the back end. But they just did not face a lot of quarterbacks that were capable of exposing it. They faced Carson Beck, and he ripped him to pieces. They faced Will Howard last night. One of the very popular talking points coming in is, well, Will Howard's only thrown for over 300 one time this year, and that was against Oregon. Update: Will Howard has now thrown for over 300 twice this season, because you were number 2 last night. 24 of 29, 311 yards, 3 touchdowns. Here's the hidden secret that was right out in plain sight with Ohio State. All they needed to do is lean into who they are. You'll notice a lot of times in big games in college football, these teams convince themselves that they got to be an extra special version of what they've been the whole year. And it spells a lot of folks' downfalls, frankly. It's when you look at the opponent that you got coming up, and you think, well, what we've been so far is good enough, but we're going to have to be, either we're going to need to be a little bit more, or we're going to have to do something extra special. If you're Ohio State, you have the benefit of not needing to be that. Only a few teams in the country can say this. Only a few teams in the country can look in the mirror and say, no matter who we line up against, all we got to be is ourselves, and we'll put ourselves in a really good position to win. Sounds good, but when most teams say that to themselves, they're lying. When Ohio State says that, they're not, which begs the question again, what in the world was happening 2 weeks ago when Michigan came in there? And need I remind anyone, not even a particularly good game from Michigan. It will forever boggle the mind. I am not here to relitigate that game. I am actually going to put a positive spin on it in just a second. But there were 2 critical factors I thought that were in play here. Both of them got tested. Both of them passed, like with flying colors from Ohio State. I do not think it was possible, if you were not inside that building and inside that football program, I don't think it's possible that you could have definitively known what was coming here. Only because what was coming was totally predicated based off the mentality of that program. The fan base's mentality had sucked, but for good reason. You guys were angry. Some of you no-showed the game from a ticket sales standpoint. I don't know, as a sign of depression or as a sign of resistance or protest. I'm not even saying it was invalid. I'm just saying a bunch of Tennessee folks scooped those tickets up because you didn't desire to go enough. So anyway, my point is, had the football team's mentality reflected that, they would have gotten beaten last night. It didn't. But there was no way to know that unless you were inside the building. Well, none of us were inside the building. So I'm sitting here guessing and trying to anticipate, like, how's Ohio State going to look? Boy, I didn't have to wait long. You didn't have to wait long at all. So that was part one, okay? What's your mentality going to be? Do you get yourself up off the deck? Any competitor worth his or her salt will. Are you? Well, the answer was in the affirmative. Yes. Okay, so that's part one. They come out as hot as any Ohio State team. They play about as perfect the first quarter as that Big Ten championship game against Wisconsin all those years ago. And then part two was the competitive resolve. And that got tested towards the half. So you get up big, and that's wonderful. So we've answered the question about what kind of mentality you're going to show up with. Check. But then part two is it's 21-10. Tennessee scores. They're going to get the ball to start the third quarter. I was up in the press box mainly because I don't like walking around the field when it's 20 degrees. So I go up there, and yeah, you make fun of me all you want to. I would too, but I mean, that was the deal. So I'm walking around the press box. I'm talking to a bunch of folks. Here was the vibe amongst the folks who cover Ohio State for a living and the national types who have watched from a distance. It was, if Tennessee scores to start this third quarter, it is about to get insanely uncomfortable in here. And so everybody can look at this game with revisionist glasses on and say Tennessee never had a shot. Boy, I knew from bell one. Well, it sounds good, and no one's going to be able to refute that. But I think most people are lying to themselves if they don't admit there was a moment there at half where you're waiting for Tennessee to come out and start the third quarter where you may not have thought, oh, could get a little dicey here. I had a couple of folks ask me if they got out to that early lead only to have Tennessee reel them back in and take this thing in Columbus with all this orange in the building, what's it going to be like? It didn't matter because Ohio State started the first half with 3 touchdowns. You know what they did the second half? Tennessee goes, like 6 plays for 8 yards. Ohio State, touchdown, touchdown, touchdown. That's killer instinct. If they play like that, they'll win the national championship. I think it's pretty obvious if they played the version of ball they played last night. They're the most talented team in college football that I've seen this year. At their best, they're better than any other team I've seen this year. So then the follow-up question is, can you bottle that up and duplicate it? Well, we're going to play the rest of the games, so that remains to be seen. But the competitive resolve, that got answered too. It is not just one part, because you can show up with the right mentality all you want to, but that's like I was looking around if there was a little energy bottle around here. You could pop a 5-hour energy, and if you've built up the resistance to caffeine, the likes that I have, that stuff wears off. Just like hype can wear off, just like excitement and motivation and energy, all that stuff wears off, and then your competitive resolve gets tested. To me, that's the most important part here, because to me, that's the stuff that has to sustain you. Because I'll tell you, that hype and the mentality you show up with many times can be affected by external factors. So in Ohio State's case, that could be that people have doubted you for 2 weeks. People have trashed you for 2 weeks. You lost to Michigan. You were mad at your own self for 2 weeks, and you knew that your back was against the wall. If you're on that coaching staff, I don't believe this, but there was a train of thought that your job may be on the line. Would have been crazy, but there was a train of thought. At the very least, you know that a lot of what you pride yourself in has been called into question, and we got to go silence that. All right, that can motivate you, and it can bring out the best in you, and that's wonderful. But if it brings out such the best in you that no one doubts you anymore, and that was your fuel, then it doesn't work so well when you go play Oregon, or if you go play Texas, or if you keep going, if you stay alive. So you have to bake in the competitive resolve as well. Competitive character is also what you can call that. The best have it. Most don't, because most are not the best. So if you claim you're the best, you got to have it. They had it. Ohio State has it. I always wanted to believe it was there. I think they showed it when they played Oregon the first time this year. They just showed it in a loss, so no one really remembers that. I got to tell you, when I was there pregame, I always talk to as many folks on the staffs as I can. Tennessee understood the situation. Like, Tennessee understood this is a pretty big challenge. I don't think Tennessee loved the way they matched up at all. Conversely, I think Ohio State was enamored, like in love with the way they matched up in this game. Now, that's not a shock, but I heard some picks for Tennessee to win this thing outright, like by some smart people I highly respect, people who know ball more than me. Some of them picked Tennessee to win. So it was not a foregone conclusion. This game was not presented on a national scale like Penn State SMU was, like Texas Arizona State will be presented this week, where if you find someone picking the underdog, you really got to carve out 10 minutes and have them explain their rationale. There were a lot of folks who picked Tennessee to win the game outright. Fortunately, I was not one of them, but I did think it was going to be a more competitive game. I also thought Dylan Sampson would play. So, there was that. I'm not sure that makes much of a difference, but there was that. But that plus the demeanor Ohio State came out with, plus the fact that you can talk all you want to about how you warmed up with no shirt on, and you can talk about this and you can talk about that. The conditions impacted one team a lot more than they impacted another team. Now, that's where I was wrong. So I'm sitting there thinking to myself, Ohio State needs to throw the ball a lot more. Like, they've got Smith here. They've got Ibuka here. You got to use them. Will Howard's got the ability. This Tennessee secondary can be had. But if you got to throw the ball a whole lot in cold weather, and Tennessee, I'm sitting there thinking to myself pregame, Tennessee, they're a much better run outfit. They're more, it's a more conducive environment to them thriving than Ohio State, given the game plan I thought was going to be needed. Nope, that's where I was the most wrong. I was the most wrong in thinking that the conditions may either be neutral or may even slightly favor Tennessee. No. No, I don't care. I don't care that it was only 5 degrees warmer in Knoxville at kickoff than it was in Columbus. Home team handled it. Road team did not. Cold weather didn't lose Tennessee the game, but man, Ohio State looks so comfortable, and it's tough to be comfortable in those conditions. I got a lot more to say. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. So a lot of you may be watching this video, but you don't watch the live shows. A lot of you may be watching the live show right now. Just do me a favor and subscribe. It's free. It doesn't sign you up for anything. You'll never even know you're subscribed. It just helps us to keep the show free and present it year-round. So, the Michigan conundrum. The Michigan game compared to this game. How do you make sense of that? Because I've got a theory on that, but I know many of you have theories as well. If you're an Ohio State fan, this is all that's been on your mind for the greater part of 2.5 weeks now is how did we come out the way we did against Michigan? How did we not adjust? How did we allow a very average Michigan team playing a very average game, even by their own standards this year, to beat us? How did this happen? How did we not utilize the weapons that we have at our disposal? How, why? That's all you've been asking yourself. And then last night, you do what you did against Tennessee. And on one hand, like I was talking to Jeremy Birmingham on the sideline as the clock was winding down, and he's like, I've got to try and make sense of all this. Because I've got to explain what we just watched, which is one of the best performances in Buckeye history, and it's coming on the heels of one of the worst, and it's the same teams, it's the same coaching staff, and the fan base has this hollowness inside their chest that this win will be great, but this win will not fill that void fully. Maybe a championship will, who knows, but it's just trying to make sense of everything. Hey, you're trying to apply logic to an illogical situation, or are you? What I think happened at Ohio State's not overly complex. Because I'm going to stick with the same story I've stuck with since I went up there in the spring and talked to that staff and talked to those folks in the spring. They were tired of allowing lesser teams, Michigan, in their opinion, Michigan, a lesser program, they were tired of them treating Ohio State themselves like the nail. There's no reason. I mean, I'm just telling you now, folks inside the Woody Hayes Center there, building the Woody, they look around and rightly say there's no reason anyone should ever be more physical than us. We are Ohio State. We dictate the terms in recruiting. We get whoever we want to. We are an apex recruiting and talent acquisition predator program. So if we can do that, that means we get to choose how we play. We get to choose which philosophy we want to work with. And after last year, they looked in the mirror, and Ryan Day did an honest assessment of his program, and he said, we will never be out-physicaled again, by them or by anyone else. And so they set about changing the culture and changing the identity there. And you may think to yourself, oh, the Michigan game plan, it's really formulated during the week of the game. No, it's not. A vast majority of that stuff's done in the spring, but with Michigan specifically, the way they were going to philosophically approach that game was etched in stone months and months and months ago. So it didn't matter the way the season had played out. They had a message that they were going to send against Michigan. They tried. It did not work. But that's the way they called the game, the way they did. That's the reason they called the game the way they did. And it's also how you could get out of Michigan week. And it's like scales are pulled off your eyes and you revert back to normal Ohio State and you call the game like normal Ohio State should call a game, and you just rip someone's throat out. And you hold it above yourself, and then the blood drips down, and you look like an absolute savage program. And then you look in the rearview mirror. Well, how did that happen? Well, it happened because you didn't approach that week like any other week. Which brings me back to the point I made about the way Ohio State has handled the Michigan game. They're at a 10 out of 10 on the intensity scale and the focus scale. None of these things lack. They've just approached the game the wrong way. They approached it the wrong way again this year. Now, they can't go back in time on that. So I actually think what may end up happening, and I mean from this point moving forward, because you can't go back in time, is that right there will end up serving this team well the rest of the season, the rest of the way through this tournament. I am not saying it was a good thing to lose to Michigan. It's a horrible thing to lose to Michigan. But if I'm accepting that I can't go back in time and change that, the only thing you can hope to do is take some positives out of a negative situation. I mean, one of the hallmarks of successful people in programs is not that they don't fail. Everyone fails. How many of you are good enough to get positives out of that? Well, if they can look at that and just be reminded and get further honed in on who they are and being who they are instead of trying to be something they're not, then in the aggregate, they'll put themselves in a better position to play like they did last night, and they'll put themselves in the best position possible to beat Oregon this Saturday, or not this Saturday, this upcoming week. But look, I could be right about that, and they still go lose to Oregon. And the reason is because Oregon's really good. Maybe Oregon's the best team in the country. Maybe Ohio State's the best team in the country. Maybe they're the two best teams in the country. But effusive praise for Ryan Day, effusive praise for Ohio State. I got to say, so I didn't watch the broadcast because I was at the game. I heard that Herb Street was calling out some of the lunatic fringe fan base up there. And they've been very vocal lately. I've had a pretty soft opinion on that, but my core opinion has been, with any program, Ohio State included, if you invest to a maximum degree, if you give your time, energy, if you pay for your season tickets, if you give everything that the program asks of you, it is not too much to ask to want your coach to win more than one out of every 5 or 6 years in your biggest rivalry game. So it is not the craziest thing in the world for the head coach at Ohio State to be under a lot of pressure if he's lost 4 in a row to Michigan. That's not a crazy thing. If the fan base isn't doing their part, then it's not fair. But they are doing their part. You got to do your part as the head coach. But I will say this. So last night, I know the rap that a lot of Ohio State fans have gotten nationally, maybe I fed into that a little bit on this show. I want to tell you guys, I am right with Ryan Day's wife and family as we're walking down to the field with time ticking down in the fourth quarter. So I'm walking right behind him. And the way you get to the field at Ohio Stadium is you got to go through the crowd. And so I'm walking right behind them through the crowd. And I got to tell you, there were probably dozens and dozens of interactions I watched between fans, most of whom she didn't know, and her, his wife, and then his kids are behind her. All of it was positive. And you know what it was? It was relief, it was empathy, and it was just a bunch of people saying, I'm so happy for you, so happy for him, so proud. So, for all the bad rap that those folks have gotten, it's the loudest ones on the internet that have earned that. And I'm not even saying that the emotion was misplaced. I get the emotion. But I do want to say, not everyone is foaming at the mouth right now up there. Not everyone was calling for Ryan Day's job if he were to lose the game. There were people doing that. It wasn't going to happen if he lost the game. But there were people doing that. But you know what? Now they're going to go play Oregon again. I'll talk about that game a little bit later. But this one was crazy to be at. Crazy because it was over very, very quickly, as it turns out. And then it was like it was like a 2.5-hour validation celebration, if you will. Now, I do want to say this. Tennessee folks rolled really deep into this thing. There were a ton of Tennessee people there last night. And I posted it in the pregame because I'm sitting there, I'm on the field, and I'm in the press box, and I can see it. And I said, hey, the Tennessee takeover was real. Well, I think some people misconstrued that to mean I was picking Tennessee to win, or that I was talking about the game and the way it was going to go. No, I was talking about the amount of Tennessee folks in the crowd. Most of them spilled out long before the end of regulation. But some of you were trying to whitewash history on me today and say, oh, that didn't happen. Yeah, it did happen. There were like 30,000 people in the stands last night, and they were loud in the pregame. So credit to them. Credit to them. And I hope you guys got home safely last night. You got a head start on the traffic, but 42-17. And dare I say, the game wasn't even as close as the final score indicated. I think it could have been 50-0. So congratulations to Ohio State.